everyone. So glad to have you with us. So happy to be sharing space with Mark Nepo today.
Wonderful to be here with you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And as many of you know, Mark is the author of many, many wonderful books. The Book of Soul, 7,000 Ways to Listen, the Book of Awakening, and he has a new book of collected poems, The Half-Life of Angels, that's coming out next month. And we'll be sure to send a link to that in our aftercare package. Also, I'm sure Mark will be gifting us with some poems from that today as well.
Yes, I'm very excited. I actually got the first copy yesterday in the mail, so we
Oh,
can,
beautiful.
and I'm just thrilled. As you know, James, I recently turned 72, which when I was younger, if I met someone my age, I thought they were ancient. It doesn't seem so old right now. And this is wonderfully has three books in one volume of poetry from the last 20 years. So I'm just thrilled to be able to share this and have it come out.
Yeah. And I was going to ask you, just as a way of jumping into our conversation today, I know you sometimes tell this story about, I think you were coming home from college and you just decided to up and tell your parents, like, I'm going to be a poet. And then how they reacted to that and how you reacted to their reaction.
Yeah, yeah, sure. So I was a sophomore in college, and I hadn't written very much yet, but I had in college a moment, kind of a mystical moment, where I was certain that this was my life, and I went home, and I was the first in my family to go to college. So I came home very excited and naive to declare that I was a poet, even though I had written very little. And my parents, who grew up in the Great Depression, were like, "What? You know, we sending you where for what?" And so my father and I wound up in this classic archetypal argument where he was uh, very agitated, saying, "How are you going to make a living?" And blurting out of my mouth, I wound up saying to him, "I'm going to live a making." And he wasn't very thrilled with that either. Um, but I was stunned because I didn't know where that came from, and it took me years to understand what that really meant and what really was asked of me. And so it was a blessing. And so many times when we're being honest and truthful, we're visited. We're visited with utterances that then become our teachers.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
you talk about, oh, sorry, go
No,
ahead.
go ahead, Tanisha.
Okay, sorry. We're both like so many questions and thoughts and all this exchange. And you talk about how truth for you has been the pivotal thing, the most important thing in some ways that brings the most excitement and exhilaration. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I mean, I really feel that our authentic, and I don't mean truth with the truth, but how when we are authentic, that that gives us a thoroughness by which we connect to the common center of life that we all share. So it's as if our authenticity is what cleans up, makes the conduit that we are clear and an open vessel. And so when I'm truthful about whatever it might be, a wonder, a pain, a confusion, a fear, an uncertainty, uh, that ultimately, most of the time, rewards me with an insight or an image or a metaphor or a story through which I'm asked to stay in conversation with it. So many, I often say that I retrieve poems. I don't author them out of nothing. I don't channel. but I work in cooperation with life. And I share that because it's not just a poetic creative process, it's the introspective process. The words become the trail. I have come to believe that poetry is the unexpected utterance of the soul.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And would you say that poetry has been kind of the doorway into some of the larger work that you do in the world? Because you're a poet and you're also so much more than that, philosopher, essayist, memoirist. Like what you do, you really are living a making, because you're making things that don't really fit very easily into other people's categories or boxes.
Yeah, that's so true. Well, I do feel like poetry, and I've always seen through the lens of metaphor. I mean, that was my earliest, before I had words for it, that was my earliest language. Even when I was a little boy, if I was out and the wind would go through the trees, it was as if it was saying to me, what is it? What are we like? Pay attention. What is this like? And so poetry is the well, it's the source. And actually, my nonfiction books, I mean, my publishers make those distinctions. To me, it's all poetry, it's just a larger canvas. And and interestingly, with that, I totally honor that each genre is you can devote your life to it, whether you're a novelist or an essayist. For me, what's developed is I have been called to use the genres as tools in one toolbox. And so I feel like that truth we were talking about is the guiding principle of my inquiry. And if in that I need to be lyrical, then I'm confessional and lyrical. If I need to do research, then I'm a scholar. If I need to tell a story, then I'm a storyteller. And for me, my job is to make that one seamless, accessible form.
Ooh, seamless, accessible form. It reminds me of a thing that you said in Drinking the River of Light, which I love.
Oh, thank you.
Beautiful, beautiful book on creative process for everybody listening. And in there you say, each of us must find one form that will welcome the questions that will liberate our mind.
Mm. Yeah, and it's fascinating. I think I use examples in there that we are called to be true to our own voice, whatever that is, and it doesn't always fit. There are many examples I think I use. George Bernard Shaw was a playwright, quote. Well, he was a social philosopher, but if he would have written social philosophy, it just wouldn't have worked. That was Robert Frost was a short storyteller, but he did it through poetry. So everybody kind of finds their form regardless of what the world says, and we are just asked to be true to it.
Yeah, and I think when you are true to the form that calls to you, you open up that same place of authenticity and truth for other people. Because I can't tell you how many times, and I think this works for anyone's work that we admire, but I read your stuff and it is all poetry to me. And I think because you're always thinking in metaphor and you're creating metaphor, it opens up metaphor for me. So I'm seeing my own and creating my own metaphors in poetry, even if I'm reading what could be called an essay or what could be called.
Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you.
Yeah.
And what that speaks to is not just my work, but it's more the image. If we use the image, so if I'm in exploring a poem, I am drawn to a certain plateau to have a view. Well, I'm inviting you there, and through my work, you get to stand there and see for yourself. So it makes total sense. What do you see once you're there? And that you're in conversation with it, and it presents you with your own metaphors and your own stories. I think that's one of the things in putting this this major collection together, going through poems, was very interesting. Is that earlier on, and I can't distinguish a cutoff point. But early on, of course, which is normal, archetypal, when in looking back at the earlier poems of this 20-year period, I think I was diving into the deep and bringing up to the surface things that I was surprised to find to share. But somewhere along the way, and it's not clear where, I live in the deep.
Mm.
So now I invite you to come be there with me.
Mm.
And there's nothing wrong with the earlier stance. But I did know, as I was going through all of these, this 400 pages of poetry, I noticed this distinction, which is so fascinating.
Yeah. It's that difference, isn't it, between saying to your readers, look, there's an ocean. I can see there's an ocean over there versus being swimming in that ocean.
Yeah.
And saying, come into the ocean. I'm in here.
Yes. And this is a craft distinction, which I'm happy to share with all of you too, which you might recognize. But early on, I could see, which I wouldn't have seen early, but early we're so excited when we see anything.
Yeah.
That diving down, I bring everything up. The seaweed and the net and the tire that it happens to hook, and then say here. Well, and in revising years later. Oh, it's clear. I can. Oh, I no. Actually, I should take the seaweed off and drop the tire. It's really only this.
Drop the tire.
It's really only
Right.
this.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
getting down to the essence, and I wonder too if it's that sort of youthful exuberance, like you're saying, of like, look, I touched the depth, right? I spent time in the deep, and look at everything I brought up, and then part of the authentic process is like, well, no, I just want to live down here now. This is where I want to be. I don't need to go back and forth or sort of prove myself. I know we've talked before about the pressure to do that being involved in academia, right? And once you sort of decide where you want to dwell as a creative person, then you don't have to go back and forth anymore.
Yeah, and I think, and this is archetypal too, and this begs, a choice point for all of us. I am committed to living in the depth and to being in relationship.
Yes.
So that means that I do want to come back and share and want to hear what you saw in your depth. And you take, so here's two examples, William Blake, the wonderful prophetic William Blake, his last prophetic books are inscrutable. And it's not because of what he had to say was obscure. It's because he stopped giving us a map.
Mm.
He got so intoxicated and excited that he didn't leave any trail markings. And so we don't know what he's talking about sometimes because he didn't stop to say, hey, wait a minute, did you take a left here or a right? Like, where are you going, buddy? And now on the other end, if you look all the way back to the story of Moses, we don't hear very much, but he had a brother, Aaron. So Moses would archetypally go up the Mount Sinai to talk to God, and then he would come down, and his brother Aaron, who was much more social, was waiting at the bottom, say, "Hey, what'd you find? What happened?" And Moses would tell him, and he'd say, "You got to tell everybody." And I'm not really good with people. And he also, Moses had a stammer too, because his mouth was burned by a coal when he was a child. So he said, "Now you go, you tell him." And what that opens for us archetypally is we all have a Moses and Aaron in us.
Mm.
We all have that which goes and listens to the deepest voice of life. And then we all have a translator in us that needs to say, how can I share my depth and what I found with others in a way that's clear and clean and accessible. And so how do we tend both voices?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It struck me in your telling of that too, that the coal that burned his mouth is sort of echoed in the fire. It
Yes.
appears to him. I don't know why that's interesting. A wound in the mouth that's of fire, and then the message
Well,
delivered through fire.
Mm.
well, I think there's a great paradox, which is, delightful in now, but and that's that the only things worth writing about are the things that are unsayable.
Mm.
Yeah.
And the most beautiful poetry in the world is what we come up with in between. I remember being young, and you'll all recognize this too. I saw something, I was excited to see something, and then I tried to say it. And then I said, well, wait a minute, that's not it. Then I try again. I go, wait a minute. And then, 5, 6, 7 times I say, well, I can see it. Why can't I say it? And that
Mm.
would be frustrating. And while I've certainly gotten better over the years, I still see something and I try to say it and I try to say it and I try to say it. But now, instead of being frustrated, I say, thank you. You just gave me 6 poems.
Right. Right.
All
Well,
of which can never quite say it.
No, not
yeah.
quite.
And that's the
Yeah.
gift too, that we can't. It's
Mhm.
the perfect flaw in this.
That's great. Well, it would be great to hear a poem or two from you
Yeah.
now, Mark, if you would
Oh,
like to share.
sure, sure. Well, let me share. Yeah, this is a poem from the new book called In Those Moments, and it's a little story poem. In those moments. Sometimes, after she falls and before she gets up, she takes a deep breath. And in those moments, she stares briefly into the center of things. It calms her, for in those moments, she drinks from something older than her life. Other times, the same thing happens when reading a passage from a book that opens her heart, or when hearing that lift in a song that makes her think of looking at the stars as a little girl. She never knows how to speak of these openings. It's as if the still point of her life rests on the bottom of all trouble like a weighted pearl, and an invisible string ties it to her heart, and every once in a while the pearl of life tugs at her heart, forcing her to fall and remember that there is nowhere to go.
Mm. Wow. At the bottom of all trouble. Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
You find the
Well,
pearl.
and so there's a good example that in exploring that feeling and that story, I didn't know that that was going to go there.
Mhm.
I didn't know that that would be this weighted pearl at the bottom of all trouble. That was the reward for being authentic to that story. And then what presented was this wonderful image and that's tied, and every once in a while it tugs at her heart, this
Mm.
connection to everything. So
Mhm.
I didn't know. I wasn't like, oh, let's end the poem there. Wouldn't that be neat? No, I'm not that smart, you know. But that's what I discovered by following the story that wanted to be told.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And you talk about that also as a kind of honoring, that honoring what emerges and what is authentic. And that we do that when we hold what's true. I thought this was such a beautiful thought, that when we hold what's true about a friend, about our ancestors, parts of ourselves, that we're bringing a deep honoring to it.
Yes, yes. I think, and it's interesting. The word honor is a beautiful word. Many words erode over time, and honor, what it originally means, and it holds this still. It literally means to keep what is true in view.
Oh,
Mm.
wow.
Isn't that so? It's such a beautiful, and in that way, really, all poetry is honoring.
Mm.
How do we keep what is true in view? And, so if how do I honor you as my friend? I keep what I know to be true about you in view, especially when you lose track of it.
Mm.
How do I honor that depth we're talking about, that life? How do I honor life? How do I honor my own soul? So
Right.
it's a beauty. So I invite folks who are with us today to think about how can you in a very specific way practice honoring what you know to be true.
Mm. That's a beautiful invitation. Yeah. I love that. I'm thinking of honoring, and the word honing also comes to
Hmm.
mind, that idea of bringing to a sharp point. I don't know if the two words are related at all, but
Well, I think that by honoring, we do hone and bring things into better, more clarity.
right. Sharper focus. Yeah.
Yeah. It
Mm.
seems like our main task because of how our brains are wired. When we have negative bias and all these things cognitively, where the brain wants to focus on what's disturbing to it or what might be dangerous or all of this. And so we kind of have to really get in there and turn our gaze on what
Well,
is deeply true.
I think this is one of the rewards of practicing being present and thorough and staying in conversation with life is in our modern world we catastrophize things and therefore we have limited or truncated our relationship with the unknown. And certainly catastrophe and difficulty can surprise us, but so too wonder and joy and love and presence and peace. After all, I can't think of one person in my life that I have loved or been loved by that I ever planned to meet.
Yeah. It's
So
so true.
how do we regain, we all need, I think,
Yeah.
to regain a more intimate relationship with the unknown.
Mm. Mm.
Love,
Yeah, that's beautiful.
yeah. With the mystery, with the what we can't know, and
Mhm.
all of that territory that kind of exists outside of this polarizing thing that happens. Oh, this is good. This is bad. This is terrible. And then there's that third thing.
Well, and I think that one of the things too that plagues all of us is that the language of judgment is not helpful because it's not specific enough.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
It doesn't help to say this is bad or this is good or this is true or this is false. You know, I think we're all challenged to be more specific um, with the evidence of our experience,
Yeah.
because judgment is a clear wall that we build around us.
Yeah.
Yeah, being clear and specific about what we know to be true, and then also holding space for the presence of mystery. And like you said, the unknown, which to me is the practice of poetry. And that's, what you were saying earlier is that you don't know where you're writing to, you're writing into the unknown and seeing where you're led.
Yeah, let me share another poem here.
Yeah.
This is a good example of things just in ordinary experience all of a sudden becoming a metaphor. We had in our home at one point we had to have our front door replaced, so I had to have carpenters come and give estimates, and after a couple of those, I woke up the next morning with this poem called Estimates from Leo. He said, "You need a new threshold." I said, "I know." He measured the opening. "It needs to be bigger." I took him by the shoulders. "Can you build me a door?" he kept squinting. Do you want this solid or see-through? I said, it has to open to the inside. He said, it'll be costly. I sighed, it already is. He did some figuring. I grew impatient. Well, can you do it? He asked, how long have you been looking? I said, ever since I first came here. He grew serious now and said, the glass must be tempered. I said, I understand. He paced and took his glasses off. What is it? I said. He shook his head. I don't want to be responsible. I'll waive all liability. He chuckled. You can't. He put down his pencil and said, I think you need to make the threshold yourself.
Oh my gosh.
Oh,
Oh, wow. I love that so much.
Well, thank you.
The bargaining that goes on.
I think I need to put that over my desk. Oh my gosh.
Yes, we're getting requests in the group. Can you please share that? It's in the book.
Yes,
Right?
I'm happy to. I think it's in the new book, but I'm happy to send it to you too separately so you can share with
Thank
folks.
you.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
That would be great. Oh, that threshold.
Yeah. And also, you have this phrase that we really love, Mark, the blessing of the ordinary, and how just so much can come of these ordinary moments and these ordinary, seemingly ordinary conversations with the people that we encounter. Like you said, we don't plan to meet these people, these teachers, but they come into our lives. And that the way that poem captures that is just glorious.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. Well, I think, in the Hindu tradition, there is a term upa guru, which means the teacher that is next to you at this moment.
Mm.
And there's always a teacher next to us in every, and so we don't have to worry if we miss them. They're always there. They're always there.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a lot of reassurance in that we don't have to worry if we missed out on, like, oh, that was a teacher, because it's so easy to look back and I missed that chance. And I think that applies so much to the creative process too. The next teacher is a few words away.
Yeah, just a few words away.
Just.
There's something too, Mark, that I experience and experienced in both of the poems that you read, and I know is a common experience as listeners to such poems. There's a kind of a little sweet agony, like a little pain that comes with that pearl. And the end of that threshold poem, you'll have to build it yourself. I feel this little kind of agony. I don't know how to talk about that.
Well, I mean, what it touches in me that is a part of all my work is what I think I talk about it as the sweet ache of being alive.
Mm-hmm.
There is, and it goes back to that in the first poem about the tug. If everything I believe that everything is connected by these invisible threads. Several traditions have myths about this that are wonderful. But I believe, and so if that's true, and I feel it is, when I feel the tug of other life, it tugs my heart. And that is at once beautiful, and there's a little ache to being tugged. And, when I was a boy, I'm sure other people recognize this too, some teachers and some adults thought I was sad. And I didn't have the language then, but I mean, certainly I did experience sadness, but in these moments, I wasn't sad. I was experiencing depth.
Mm.
And so, early on, adults told me, well, cheer up, get rid of that sadness, get rid of that feeling. And so I thought, well, I should try to do that. But I couldn't get rid of it. And actually, as life went on, it turned out that this this was depth, and it was the sweet ache of being alive. And actually, it was my oldest friend.
Mm.
It's how I know I'm here.
Mm.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
And so it is a mix of beauty and a slight ache
Yeah.
and a slight ache. And I have a poem which is in my book, The Way Under the Way, the book of poems, and I call that the moment of poetry, precisely because it's not about language. It's about this sweet ache. I can share it with you right
Yeah.
now. It's
Yeah.
very short. The moment of poetry, when the sweet ache of being alive, lodged between who you are and who you will be, is awakened. Befriend this moment. Its sweetness is what holds you. Its ache is what moves you on.
Mm.
Mm. Mm.
Mm.
Yeah, that's a threshold moment, right? To to be in between and to relish that moment of in betweenness. I was also thinking that of the weighted pearl from the first poem that you read, and how we're talking about this ache. Well, an irritant is what becomes the pearl, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this speaks again to not not being good or bad or happy or sad, but thorough and real.
Mm.
Thorough and real, because that's what brings the heart alive. There is a lot of pain. There is suffering that comes from resisting suffering.
Mm.
Carl Jung had this amazing insight among so many that he had, but he said neurosis is the substitute for legitimate suffering.
Wow.
Mm.
Mm. Yeah, it's like thinking about suffering rather than
Or trying
feeling
to,
it.
I'm not advocating suffering. It's more like we're talking about gravity. Like, yeah,
Right.
we all got to deal with gravity. So I'm not,
Mm.
but I'm just saying that we will feel a wealth of things being a spirit in a body in time on earth. Some of them will be difficult. Some of them will be wondrous. Some of them will be in between.
Mm.
But we will really suffer if we do not let life move through us.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
And sometimes we need to help each other to get through those a myriad of wonderful, amazing, deep, messy feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah. We had a great question. I mean, it's a simple question, but Katie was wondering, how do you keep your eyes fresh? How do you hold on to what's authentic and true to you? Are there things you turn to, practices? Just curious.
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing is whenever things don't seem fresh, it's a sign not that I've screwed up. It's not a deficiency marker.
Right.
It's a sign that being a human being, I'm tired. I'm
Mm.
exhausted. I need to recharge. I need to receive. That's when I go and get on the floor with my dog.
Mm-hmm.
That's when I call up a friend and say, tell me a story, any story, just anything that's not me. Okay.
Right.
Um, so that I can recharge, because what I've come, and this goes all the way back to my cancer journey in my 30s, that after almost dying, and so this, let me frame it this way. So you know, early on, like many of us, I was taught by other writers, be on the look for good material. Well, then I almost died, and I'm still blessed to be here. And the hard gift of all of that was I was given the lens of the miraculous. That is, the blessing is in the ordinary. everything is extraordinary if my heart is open enough and I'm present enough. And so I can write about a fly on the window. It doesn't matter, because if I'm present enough to it, forget getting a good poem, it will become my teacher. So the way to stay fresh for me is to forget about writing it all and just be present and open my heart and give my full attention and presence to whatever is before me until it becomes my teacher.
Mm.
And then I can't write fast enough.
I just so appreciate this lens that you're offering to all of us present here right now, that there's that difference between looking for subject matter and just deeply attending to what's right there and what it might show us. And I was struck as you were describing that by how blessing, the word to bless, means to wound, coming from the French, like meaning with a knife, even like to
That's beautiful.
to wound them. And it speaks to me to again that little ache and agony, but also permeability, because I think what you're describing is about being permeable. The wound maybe as a representation of I'm open.
Well, we all need, there's a wonderful little story I'll tell you quickly, a little parable that speaks to this. It's about, that we need to be touched and touchable, and that watching only brings us so far. So there's a little story about a master sends an apprentice. He says, I want you to sit by the river until you've heard all the river has to say to you. So he's a very serious student. So he takes all of he's got a meditation cushion, he's got chimes, he's got everything. And he goes near the river and he spends the first day figuring out where to sit. So he finally settles like halfway under a willow tree and he goes into serious meditation. And after 3 days, nothing. I mean, he's just got a terrible headache. And just as he's like, what am I doing here? A monkey comes out of the other side of the river, jumps splashing in the river, flopping, yapping, and it cracks the apprentice. He starts weeping. So he gathers his things, he goes back and tells his master the story, and his master puts his hand on his shoulder and says, the monkey heard, you just listen. The monkey heard, you just listen. Because the goal is to get wet. The goal is to get in the river of life. The goal is to be touchable, to be touched and touchable. And yes, curiosity and observation are wonderful tools that bring us more alive. They're not a place to live. Because curiosity inhabited will lead us to wonder, which is getting wet.
Yeah, get in that river. Yeah, this is so much richness, Mark. It just really, we had someone wrote in the comments like that this is the essence of this journey of attending to the wisdom of the body, of which this is the final session of this series, and it's the cherry on top.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, do we have time for one more poem?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so this is, speaking of that, this is a poem called At Every Turn. When I sweat trying to lift what no one can lift, I am praying. When I fly 1,000 miles to be stopped by the moon on the spine of an ancient mountain, I am praying. When I fall on the lawn in laughter with my dog and she won't stop licking my face, I am praying. When you are winded by the light on the photo of your mother who died so suddenly, you are praying. When your grief lets you feel the pain of those you don't know, you are praying. When life moves through us for no reason, we are all praying. I am humbled that all my efforts to pray have failed until living is praying with no intent. Now my heart is plucked like the string of a harp at every turn.
Mm.
Oh my gosh. What a great way to end, Mark. Oh, so perfect. Oh, thank you so much for being so generous with your heart, your spirit, and your time today. We're going to be immersing ourselves like the monkey in that river of your wisdom here. I so
Well,
appreciate it.
thank you guys. It's wonderful to be a part of your good work, and thanks to everyone who's been with us today. This is a beautiful, essential conversation that you're hosting.
Thank you so much. See you soon.
All right. Be well. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.